Imagine if Frankenstein's monster was a roller coaster.
It's alive! It's alive!
Well, believe it or not, there actually is a roller coaster that's the best of two roller coasters put together. Today, we're talking about one of my favorite roller coasters, the Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood Park. There's a lot of videos on YouTube that are great that talk about the history of the Phantom's Revenge roller coaster, and they do it in a very factual way. They present all the facts about the ride, they present the history, but I kind of wanted to take a little more personal approach and talk to you all about what it was like seeing this roller coaster get built and how it sort of relates to the history I have with the park. Hey everyone, it's Christian with Vertigo Views, and I am a lifelong theme park enthusiast with a love for all things travel. Today, as I said, we're going to be talking about Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. For those of you that don't know, Kennywood Park is the park that I grew up going to. I lived in Pittsburgh from my birth until 2017, so I went to Kennywood at least once every year. And then once I got older and was able to get season passes, I went multiple times a year. I was there all the time. I worked at Kennywood in high school. I worked there a little bit after college. So Kennywood was actually the place that made me realize that I love theme parks. So without Kennywood, I definitely would not be the person that I am today. So just giving you a little bit of a personal perspective, I remember seeing Kennywood for the very first time when I was a small child and we drove by it. And my mom grew up going there and we drove by and she pointed it out. And it was nighttime, the park was completely dark, but I remember just seeing the giant steel Phantom roller coaster, the pitfall ride that I think was being constructed at the time, and just wondering what the heck is this place? Like, what is this weird looking contraption that I see? What is this place that my mom is talking about? And then a little while later, I was driving down the road with my grandmother and the park was open. It was a bright sunny day and I got to see all the rides going. I got to see the steel Phantom go down its big first drop. And I was just super excited about whatever that was. I knew that it was something that I wanted to be a part of. So we ended up going to Kennywood not long after and I immediately fell in love. I was hooked on theme parks, hooked on roller coasters. After my first roller coaster, the Racer at Kennywood, I was completely all in. I could not get enough of roller coasters. I wanted to watch every Discovery Channel special. I wanted to watch every documentary. I wanted to play every roller coaster game like Roller Coaster Tycoon. I just could not get enough of roller coasters and theme parks. And I really do owe all of that to Kennywood. I had always been fascinated by the Steel Phantom, which was the biggest ride there at Kennywood until the pitfall came in the late 90s. So in order to understand what makes the Phantom's Revenge so unique, we need to talk a little bit about the history of the Steel Phantom. So picture it, Pittsburgh, 1990. Kennywood is a small local theme park that is kind of starting to gain some notoriety because it's really become beloved, not only in the Pittsburgh area, but also across the country because it's a traditional style amusement park. It's not very big, but when you go there, there's just something that feels very nostalgic and very classic whenever you visit. It's 1990, and there's a ride there called the Laser Loop, which was a shuttle loop coaster where they basically sat you down, they launched you into this loop, you went up, and then you went through the loop backwards, and that was basically it. And people loved this ride. Then Kennywood announced that they were getting rid of it. And one thing that's going to be very important about all of this is you need to remember that Pittsburghers do not like change. There's still some people there that wish for the heydays of the 70s when the Steelers were the best football team, when the steel mills were still around. You'll find people that still want to go back to the 1970s. It's the weirdest thing. So when they announced the Laser Loop was getting removed, I'm sure a lot of people were upset because a lot of people loved that ride. And there were a lot of rumors as to why they were getting rid of that ride. That it was a technological nightmare, that parts were always breaking and they had to keep fixing it, that the ride was too scary for people. There were all kinds of rumors, but the ride had been there for about 10 years, so they decided it was time for something new. So in 1991, Kennywood opened the Steel Phantom. And remember, this is not a very big park. So for them to open a roller coaster like this, first of all, in and of itself was a feat. But they announced that this roller coaster was going to be the world's tallest with the tallest drop and the world's fastest roller coaster, which is really wild to think about, the fact that this tiny park is now competing against all the Six Flags, the Cedar Points of the world, that this small park is now going to say, hey, guess what? We have the roller coaster with the longest drop, and it's the fastest roller coaster in the world. Like, that in and of itself deserves some admiration. So the Steel Phantom opens up, and immediately people are raving about it. They're saying that they can't believe that the ride is that much fun. They can't believe that a roller coaster that's tall and fast actually flips you upside down. It was just something that there were people talking about as the ride was opening up. So let's talk a little bit about that ride itself. So it had a first hill of about 160 feet tall, which was already taller than the Laser Loop, already the tallest thing in the park in 1990. And it had this like weird curve. When you went down the drop, you curved, and that's super fun. It was right along the highway. That alone would have been enough for this to be a legitimate roller coaster. But then Kennywood did something diabolical. So they wanted to have this record-breaking drop, but they didn't know where to put it. And they noticed that the ride was going to be sitting on the same ravine that the park's Thunderbolt roller coaster was. And so they thought, well, is there a way that we can make this big drop basically go over this cliff through the Thunderbolts, and we can break records that way? They did. So what's really interesting about the Steel Phantom is the second drop is the record breaker, and that drop was 225 feet, which now is not as the tallest roller coaster in the world by any means, but back then it was the biggest drop anywhere on any roller coaster. That ride dropped you 225 feet over a cliff, and then you went through another wooden roller coaster. Crazy. To this date, that drop is one of the craziest things you can experience on a roller coaster.
Go through the Thunderbolt. You can go through the Thunderbolt. And I came out, looked up, looked down, and realized we can do this. We can go 225 feet, a world record breaker right here.
So the ride hits 80 miles per hour, goes through this really sharp turn, and then whips you upside down 4 times, and then the ride's over. So people were like, what is this fever dream of a ride that I have just encountered? Like I said, at the time, it had the biggest drop in the world. It was the fastest ride in the world. It was the fastest roller coaster in the world with inversions. And it remained the fastest roller coaster with inversions for almost a decade. It was a really long time before that specific record got broken. However, once the ride opened and broke records, soon after, it started to break people's spirits. You see, the Steel Phantom was built by Aerodynamics, who has built some very well-known rides, including the Matterhorn at Disneyland. They were one of the first companies to build a steel tubular track roller coaster. They've built other roller coasters like Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point, so they definitely have a big place in roller coaster history. However, their rides became known for being, let's say, not the smoothest. So you have to remember, you're riding the Steel Phantom. It's the tallest and fastest roller coaster in the world. You go down this big drop, and then you go through this turn at 80 miles per hour with harnesses right here. And let's just say it was not the most pleasurable experience once you started going through that turn and through all the inversions on the rest of the ride. So pretty quickly, the Steel Phantom gained a reputation for being one of the roughest roller coasters in the world. People said the ride itself is great, it's really fun, but it beats you up. People had to remove earrings because they couldn't be smashing them against the headrest, coming off the ride with neck aches. They were coming off with back aches, headaches, sometimes bruises. It just sort of became known that the Steel Phantom was not something that you rode if you wanted a leisurely stroll through the park. So that was 1991 when the Steel Phantom opened, and even though it was a rough ride, the ride became iconic. It towered over everything else in the park. People came from all over the world to ride it. It was an iconic ride. So even though ridership was falling, it was still an icon of the park. But it did get to the point where less and less people were riding it, and the only people riding it were like people who didn't mind the pain, or people who for some reason it didn't hurt them, or people that just wanted to experience that thrill at least once. But not a lot of people were re-riding that ride. And so the time came for Kennywood to think about what they were going to do to fix it. This is where my personal story comes into play. So when I visited Kennywood, the Steel Phantom was there, and I didn't ride it, but I was just completely enamored by it. How tall it was, it just looked so cool, the way that it just went upside down and through the park. It was just really cool to watch. So even though I had never ridden it, I quickly fell in love with it and was telling people it was my favorite roller coaster. Cut to the year 2000. Kennywood had just opened a ride called the Aero 360, which is still in the park today. And as I said before, I couldn't get enough theme parks and roller coasters, so anything I could watch, I would watch. So they're talking about this new ride, they're showing people on it, they're talking a little bit about the park, and it's really fun. And then at the end of this news segment, the news reporter basically just goes, oh, and Kennywood also announced that at the end of this year, they'll be removing the Steel Phantom, so bye-bye Phantom. Back to you. It was like a bomb went off in my house because we weren't sure if we had heard that correctly. I started freaking out because this was so unlike what we were expecting to be done with that ride, if anything at all. You have to remember too that again, this is an iconic ride. This is not a ride that went up for 2 or 3 years and nobody liked and so they're going to tear it down. This is a ride that is iconic, not just to Pittsburgh, but to theme park enthusiasts, to people around the world. It's a very well-known attraction. So Kennywood announces in May that they're tearing down this iconic attraction that's still one of the tallest and fastest in the world, and people were not happy. As I said before, Pittsburghers do not like change, and they definitely did not like the idea of the Steel Phantom not being at Kennywood anymore. Apparently there were petitions, people calling for the park to save the ride. It was a whole thing where people were just outraged. We waited for about 3 months because they announced that the ride was closing in May, and they didn't tell us what was replacing it, but they basically announced it in May to give everybody enough time to ride the Steel Phantom one last time. Six Flags could never. Probably the biggest regret in my life is I stood in the car of the Steel Phantom, felt those head harnesses, thought, I don't want to get my head bashed by those, and never got to ride it. And that to date is still probably my biggest regret. I wish that I would have ridden the original Steel Phantom. But August comes, and Kennywood is about to announce what is going to be replacing the Steel Phantom. And we had no idea. We didn't know if it was going to be a roller coaster. We didn't know if it was going to be something else. We didn't know if it was going to be a new type of roller coaster. We really had no idea what it was going to be moving forward. So we watched the news announcement, and they announce the Phantom's Revenge. And they pull up some pictures, and they say it's going to take the best parts of the Steel Phantom and merge them with a new roller coaster. And then they encourage everybody to visit the website to learn more. So naturally, I pretty much ran to the computer with my dad. We looked it up, and they had created this whole backstory where the park had announced that they were removing the Steel Phantom, and the Steel Phantom himself appeared in the park and said, yeah, that's not going to happen. And what he proceeded to do was take the ride, completely rip it apart, twist it and mold it how he wanted, and basically told the park, do this or else. And the park was so freaked out that they just did exactly what he told him. And that's how the Phantom's Revenge came to be. What they announced was that they were going to be keeping the best parts of the Steel Phantom. They were going to be keeping the first drop and the second drop, but then everything else after was going to be removed. They also announced that they were extending the second drop slightly by just a few feet. So that immediately made people go, well, this is interesting because they're not completely ripping the ride out. But Kennywood had done this before. So the iconic Thunderbolt roller coaster that I said is right next to the Steel Phantom, it also used to be known by another name and was a completely different coaster named the Pippin. And then in the 60s, Kennywood ripped out half of that ride and replaced it with a new half. So half of that ride was the original Pippin and half of the ride was a new roller coaster. You have to remember, whenever Kennywood announced Phantom's Revenge, and when they had done all of that to the Thunderbolt, this was before RMC. This was before people were taking roller coasters and rebuilding them with the same structure. Nobody was really doing that. So Kennywood really was revolutionary for doing this, for saying, we're going to keep the best parts of a roller coaster and replace the parts people don't like with newer parts. And that's what they did. They announced they were going to be removing the inversions on the Steel Phantom so that they could change to lap bar only seats, and then that they were going to be adding some more hills and stuff at the end of the ride. And people's reactions were pretty good. I mean, people were still upset that we were going to be losing the inversions, and they were upset that the Steel Phantom was going to be gone. But people were sort of like, optimistic. Again, we had only really gotten artist renderings, so we weren't 100% sure what the ride was actually going to be like. So the Steel Phantom closed forever on Labor Day in the year 2000, and then they announced that Phantom's Revenge would be opening in May of 2001. So throughout the winter, I was desperately checking the website to see construction updates, to see what they were doing, seeing whatever I could to know what this ride was going to look like. So they repainted the black track to green. They announced that the drop was going to be bigger, like I said, so we could see them building a bigger drop. It was really cool to see this thing get constructed. However, May came and the ride still wasn't done yet. So I remember my school picnic was in about the middle of May, and the ride looked like it was done, but it wasn't ready to open. And they announced that the ride wouldn't be opening until later on in May or the beginning of summer, and the Thunderbolt would also remain closed because they actually had to remove parts of the Thunderbolt in order to put the new roller coaster through it. So the Thunderbolt and the Phantom, the two most popular attractions at the park, were not open when I went. But this was in the time where Kennywood offered you two options to visit the park. You could either pay one price and ride everything, or you could pay a general admission price and then just pay for tickets to ride the attractions. So what they did was they said, hey, these two rides are not going to be available, so we'll give you passes so that you can come back, pay that general admission price, which is only a few bucks, and then you can basically just ride these two rides whenever they're open again. So great. So finally the day came where the Phantom's Revenge opened, but it opened with a few caveats. First of all, it had opened late, so a lot of the people that came for school picnics and things didn't get to experience the ride. The ride opened with one train, which, being the fact that it was a major roller coaster opening at a small park, opening with one train meant lines were really long, and they were completely filled up. But nevertheless, people waited in line to ride it, and the reviews were amazing. I got to ride it that opening year, and I will always remember riding this ride. Just the feeling of going up that hill, being able to see the entire park. It was just amazing to finally feel like I was actually on that ride and I was actually conquering my big fear and riding what I had been telling people was my favorite roller coaster. It completely blew me away. So let's talk a little bit about what the ride is. As I said, the ride kept the iconic first drop and it kept the second drop. It was just extended slightly, but you immediately notice that you're riding with a car that has a lap bar only and no over the headrest. So you can put your hands up. There's no bumpiness. The ride was just silk smooth and it was just amazing to ride. And honestly, the trains are still some of my favorite trains. Like, I find the trains in the lap bars very comfortable. They're the only trains that are sort of set up that way, and I wish that more were built because I love the way that they're set up and I find them extremely comfortable to sit in and ride. So the first drop is great. The second drop through the Thunderbolt is mind-blowing, and then you go up this really big turn where you rush alongside the Thunderbolt, and then you actually go through the Thunderbolt again, but when you do that, you're actually ejected out of your seat. So you're going through the wooden structure of a roller coaster while being thrown from your seat. So as if you didn't already think you were going to hit the ride, you definitely feel like you're going to hit the wooden supports as you're being thrown from your seat. And then the second half of the ride is all ejector airtime. And you have to remember, again, this was before RMC, where an ejector was something that you find on a decent number of roller coasters now. Ejector airtime was not that common. Magnum XL 200 had it, and that was one of the few roller coasters that had it. So to be riding this roller coaster and be thrown from your seat multiple times with only a lap bar holding you in was something that was not being experienced in a lot of places. And so that happens a few times, and then you just slam into the brakes, and just like the Steel Phantom, you're thinking, what was this fever dream that I just experienced? It got great reviews. It blew me away. The ride was so smooth. It was so enjoyable. It was intense, but it was still really fun. It just basically was everything that the Steel Phantom wanted to be, but couldn't because it was so rough. And so the Phantom's Revenge remains an icon at the park. It would be absolutely devastating if the park were to remove it, and I can't foresee a future where they would do that unless something went horribly wrong. While there may be bigger rides there at the park now, Phantom's Revenge is probably the most iconic ride there, along with the Thunderbolt. The Phantom's Revenge is made for Kennywood's terrain and fits the park so well that I just don't know how they could improve upon it anymore. They recently repainted it, which shows that they're investing in it. They repainted it a purple color, which looks awesome. I think it fits the ride really well. And it's just been really cool to see how this park has been able to take these old rides, or these rides that aren't super popular anymore, and transform them into something new. It's really unique. And it's kind of sad because a lot of people don't understand or know the history of this ride. My own sister didn't even know that the second drop is the biggest drop on this ride. And so I just wish a lot more people knew how iconic and unique this ride is. It's not often that you're riding a roller coaster and the second drop is the bigger one. And then again, it's just so unique with its history. It's just something that doesn't happen that often. A Frankenstein roller coaster is not something that you see all the time. You'll see it with RMCs where they take a wooden structure and build a steel track on top of it. But other than that, and even before that, it was just something that was not being done. And this is a completely new roller coaster. And it's amazing. While Velocicoaster may now be my favorite roller coaster, I have to ride the Phantom's Revenge again to sort of see how it compares now that I've ridden Velocicoaster. Phantom, I think, will always be like my number 0 roller coaster. It'll always like be at the top of my list for nostalgic reasons, because it just is the roller coaster that made me fall in love with roller coasters before I even rode it, back when it was the Steel Phantom. And it's just such a great ride. It's had such a big part in my life, and I just cannot imagine a world where the Phantom's Revenge doesn't exist. So what do you all think of this style of video where I'm reviewing a ride and giving you a bit of a history, but kind of doing it from a more personal standpoint? Do you like this? Do you wish I just stuck to only the facts, or do you kind of like hearing my own personal thoughts and opinions? Let me know in the comments, because I'm really curious. And also, I'm a travel agent specializing in theme parks, so if you're looking to plan your next theme park trip, reach out to me. The link will be in the description as well. And that way we can get you traveling to a really fun theme park without all the stress. So hit me up if you want to do any traveling around the world. Click the like button, subscribe, let me know in the comments what you think of this video. And until next time, everybody, have a great day.